Welcome to the Fractional Source podcast. I'm James Mitchell, and with me, as always, is the Chief Executive Officer of Fractional Source, TJ Kennedy. And before we introduce our guest, I just want TJ to spend a couple minutes talking about what Fractional Source is and what you can expect moving forward.
Thanks, James. I appreciate it. Fun to get this podcast going. Fractional Source is really here to solve problems for local government agencies rather than just identify them. Anybody can go hire a consultant to identify problems. But at the end of the day, Fractional Source is trying to pull together C-level type leadership that can help agencies and lead them into the future, leveraging technology, implementing solutions, and most importantly, to have a strategy to go execute and get things done. And at the end of the day, the thing we need to do most in government is be effective for our community and our citizens. And to be able to do that, you've got to have the leadership and resources that can make that happen. And here in 2025, the way to find those resources and that leadership has changed. And so we've been asked so many times in the past year or two that, hey, do you know any fractional leaders that can come do this? Do you have experienced people in the private or public sector that can make a difference for our agency? Do you know somebody who can go implement a strategy to bring us to the next level? And that was really the foundation of why Fractional Source was created, was to bring that type of talent together to be able to help agencies, do more, be more effective, and most importantly, do it efficiently.
That's great. Thanks, TJ. And actually, it's a great segue to our guest, Jack Pellegrino. Thanks for joining us, Jack. Jack's got about 4 decades in government contracting, procurement, and supply chain management experience. Really, kind of fits the exact mold that we're talking about when we speak about leaders in both the public and private sector from a Fractional Source perspective. Jack, I don't know if you want to give a couple minutes on your background before we jump into it, but thanks again for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thank you. And TJ, thanks for inviting me as your guest today, and look forward to future sessions with you as well. But we really, as James started to say, my background spans a little bit over 4 decades in government procurement, both on the commercial side, the private side, working for some private contractors, always in the federal space, and state and local space as well. And most recently, I've just retired after serving for 12 years as the director of purchasing and contracting for the County of San Diego, which is the second largest county in California and 5th in the nation. So in those roles, I've had a real great opportunity to see the effectiveness and lack thereof sometimes, both on the public and private side. And really, there are lessons to be learned on both sides of that going forward. So it's a real, we live in quite a transformable period, probably the most important transformable period in my lifetime in this industry. So I look forward to talking about some of the topics in this podcast and looking at a new way of doing business.
That's great. Thanks, Jack. And thanks again for being here. Let's just talk about experience real quick, because you've got a lot of it, but I think given the shift that we're seeing right now, how can that experience that, over, like we said, almost 40 years or more than 40 years in this sector in particular, so much can be learned in that amount of time, but what specifically do you think applies today, and how can public sector leaders and people looking for leadership use your experience to shine a light on what's next?
Well, I think one of the real changes in our world, businesses cannot be conducted as usual. It's not our taxpayers, our constituents, our stakeholders expect us to do things more expediently with the expertise. So the way that we go about, I think we face a crossroad in our industry right now, especially in the public sector, whether it be at federal, state, or local, of how we attract, hire, and retain, and most importantly, train our workforce in being the most effective public servants that we can be. And that's where I think Fractional Source is a wonderful platform for us to think differently, because business if you're a leader of any size organization, business as usual, as I said, is not going to be an acceptable outcome to your stakeholders or to your directors.
How do you approach, maximizing value for taxpayers in this kind of innovative, world that we're in today when we look at new technologies that are available, whether it's around procurement or just government operations in general, and how do we speed up some of that adoption to get the benefit of it?
I think it first starts with information. In my experience, public or private, we have we had data lakes of information. We used to call them data lakes. But they were all in a silo. Okay, and we had so much data, we didn't have tools to extract the data or to relate the data in a way that it was meaningful, where we could start making meaningful conclusions and looking at our trends and also forecasts. And so I think one of the things that we start with to be successful, to add value, is making sure that our functions are no longer siloed. And that starts with data integration. And then I'll call it the relationships between business departments within an organization. And I'll be specific with the finance organization, the procurement organization, and the IT organization. I call that the three stools, the three legs of a stool. And when one of those is not operating, helping to operate effectively, I think your chances of success are hindered. So I say it's starting with the integration of the cooperation between those three key executive departments.
So, Jack, just on that, how do you incentivize those three organizations to work together in your example and bringing those stovepipe or those walls down and showing them the way?
Well, as far as incentives, I mean, it starts at the C-suite, and really a commitment from the chief executive or the board or whoever the managing body is, to say that those three functions must work together. They must share information. They must operate strategically together. And I would say naturally, between the individuals that are serving in those roles, is to expose for each of your colleagues why this integration and this cooperation and collaboration is of utmost importance. I remember back in the day, I was told, what is it? Just don't tell people why they should do something, but also share with them what the benefit is to them for that type of behavior or cooperation or integration.
So on that exact point, Jack, I think you have hit on something that every city manager, every county manager, every city council, every county commission struggles with, which is, how do I get the best leader in place for all three of those organizations, right? If we look at finance, we look at procurement, we look at IT, those are critical. Those are also three areas where oftentimes talent is hard to get into government from the private sector, because they typically can make more money on the private side as a CFO than maybe as a finance administrator in a local government agency, although there's maybe more mission that can bring them to that. So how does city county leadership attract the best people for those three roles? And then a part two to this question, after we get past the attracting part, is how do we build that camaraderie so that they all work together? But let's hit on first, just because in your experience, how many other agencies that you've worked with have the right person in that seat for both finance, procurement, and IT, all three at the same time?
TJ, I think it's extremely challenging, even with an organization as large as ours. And those organizations, the challenges in the public sector, the leadership of those organizations changes somewhat frequently. And it's always subject to the change in administrations elected officials that may drive an organization in a different way. But to your point, the best practice that I've seen is where organizations take executives that have had a broad experience and use them strategically, and not on necessarily a full-time basis, but have them come in, because often they have the ability to have an insight and recommendations that are out of the daily, what I call the daily churn. All of us, myself included, when I was working day to day for the county, you get into the mode of transactional, doing the transactions of the business. And we really get so busy with that transactional work that we don't make time for ourselves to be strategic or reflective of our work and how we can improve. And that's where I think the concept of fractional source is so innovative, in that it allows a group of professionals in those three very important domains to be able to be to come in and do a look under the hood, if you will. Lift the hood and say, well, why is this engine not running at top efficiency?
It's funny because government, so on the federal side, right? They'll do this internally with detailees, and they'll bring people from other agencies for temporary, what I'd say, precision projects, right? Very deliberate, discrete pieces of work. Even those people get sucked into that churn eventually, and somehow they become a full-time employee, right? And people tend to forget, like, actually, you're here for these three specific things, and it's up to the organization to make sure that those folks understand that they're being measured against, KPIs, whatever it is, that are tied to that very specific set of projects. So the three entities you're talking about, both procurement and IT, and finance, right? They've got a big portfolio. But inside that portfolio are very specific, priorities of the administrations that you're talking about that tend to churn almost as much as the individuals that are appointed to those positions or hired to those positions. So how do you keep the organization focused, on that once you get strategy in the house, how do you keep people focused on it? And how do you create what I like to call sort of like a conveyor belt of those projects to continue to move forward and evolve, because strategy is not static, right?
Right.
What are some methods that you've seen successful there?
Well, the first one, and you use the term that KPIs. Every organization is going to have their unique. It should have a set of KPIs of what drives their business, what things. There are no two organizations that are exactly the same because of the nature of who they serve. For example, at the county level, we had a very broad portfolio. That's significant as far as the goods and services that we're providing for taxpayers. In a different organization, whether it be a city, the footprint might be such that the demographics of the city or municipality may be quite differently. So I would expect KPIs to be different. But so many organizations have forgotten, or maybe never have had that skill set. You don't need a dozen KPIs. You need a couple, three that really are the key facets of your business and where your vision is going. And I think even on the private side, the businesses that were, I'll call it, religious in updating their strategy, their goals, whether it be semi-annually or annually, are the ones that were successful. And those that were just saying, here's our vision, and really not holding themselves or reporting on how they're doing, were the ones that were, they wake up a year from now and they go, well, we didn't accomplish what we wanted to. Well, we weren't sharing, we weren't tracking our progress and adjusting, most importantly, adjusting along the way. And I think that's where we all get sucked into this churn. I'll call it transactional churn. That being able to step back and say, are we really accomplishing what we need to accomplish is a critical skill that that we need to emphasize in today's day and age.
Well, James and Jack, I think that's really prescient. And if we get nothing else out of our conversation today, I think this is like the most important issue. James, as you remember, back at the urging of Sue Swinson in our FirstNet days, we went off and created the strategic roadmap, which really focused on just two things. Jack suggested three. I think 2 to 3 is a good range there. And, it was go create a $100 billion public-private procurement. And then the second was, focus on state, local public safety, consultation to get input from all 56 states and territories and all the police, fire, and emergency management and ambulance personnel, EMS across the country. But narrowing it down to something as simple as that's really hard, right? It's funny, you would start with 300 things you need to focus on, and it's narrowing it down to those 2 or 3. And I think that's where most struggle, right? Is you have 30 priorities across the community rather than 3. And so I think that point of being able to narrow down that focus of a new administration, think about a city council or county commission offsite with a city or county manager and some outside leadership to build that strategic roadmap for any community, a city or a county, and then to help them focus on what are the 3 or 4 KPIs we're going to have for the entire community, period. And then how does everything have to funnel into that? Because I know as a CEO, it's so important if you could walk up to any employee of an entire team or any person in an agency and say, hey, what are you working on? I'd love to learn about it. And they tell you, and how does that relate to our 3 KPIs, right? How does that relate to accomplishing the most important goals that we have? And if they can't articulate that, you're never going to get it done. And if you don't measure that and put out dates that you're going to hold yourself publicly accountable to, we're going to build this by June of 2026, whatever that may happen to be. You have to do that to really accomplish big, audacious goals in government.
PJ, you make a very good point there about often organizations do not have the right expertise to do that. Because the folks that they have are transactionally oriented, operationally oriented, and aren't going to be the type of leaders that will be audacious, I get to use a word, and really skilled at leading an organization and communicating whatever those 2 or 3 goals are. We're going to communicating it in a way that it's actionable, and part of that is accepting risk as well. Many of us, and myself included, when we're in the day-to-day environment, we tend not to be risk takers. But to set back to something that the 3 of us talked about earlier, about incentivizing and motivating an organization to be able to be successful in this new environment, it is to allow the organization to accept to be less risk averse, and really do things differently if you want to achieve different results.
Well, yeah, the irony of the risk averse organization who doesn't publicize or hold themselves accountable in the public, it's like, well, what's the risk then? Like if you internalize all of these outcomes and don't, evangelize outside and show that you're producing, and you're focused on 300 things internally as opposed to 3 to 5 really big things externally, the metrics for success are sort of inverted there. I worked for Jeb Bush early in my career, and he was one of the first governors in the country to publish the budget on the internet. Budget proposals before they went to the House and Senate were put out in the public, and it wasn't 100, 200 things. It was, here are my 3 key priorities that I'm going to go fight for. And he won favoritism on that, but at the same time put those things out there to be measured by the public, and at a time when that was just not something that was terribly popular. So I think you see the curvature of leadership today, people that are more transparent and that are more vocal, and that espouse what, sort of like they eat their own dog food, right? They're doing everything that they're practicing the golden rule of public policy, which is I'm going to execute for you the same things that I would execute for myself, and I'm going to do it out in the open. Those folks are going to have a much more robust career from a leadership perspective. And they're going to bring people along with them that are going to think and feel that way too. To the extent that like we've all had a different uh, lengths of careers, but I think we can all think back to various projects where it'd be great if I could pull someone in for 6 to 10 months to help me just go execute these one or two things, because that churn you're talking about, Jack, that, it's administrative, it's operational, it's still required to some degree. We'd like to see some efficiency there, but I'd venture a guess that 60 to 70% of the things that you have to do, that you've been trained you have to do in the public sector, are actually things you do have to do. Like, it's not just noise. So, it can swallow other things, but if you have that third or fourth appendage to go execute some of these other strategic priorities, that churn can still exist, and you can actually probably get more out of it, and vice versa.
Right. One of the things that I'm teaching in my operations management class at the university right now at USD is the concept of the three whys. And often when we're in that day-to-day transactional basis, we don't ask why. We don't ask why 3 times or 4 times, and too often after asking just a couple times, we get the answer is, well, I never thought about doing it differently. I've always done it that way. And so, and that's where I think an outside perspective, with a fractional resource, someone that's been on multiple sides, on multiple problems, both in large organizations and smaller organizations, because being in a smaller organization is fundamentally different than some of the large bureaucracies that we've all served in. And it's a blessing and a curse. I know, a couple of my colleagues have said, yeah, I'm in a small business and I'm the chief bottle washer and cook and server, and I do it all. And I go, isn't that exciting? And I've done it when I was, TJ and I spent some time at SAIC, and that's what we did it all there, right, TJ?
Absolutely. Well, and to your point here, I think on getting that outside perspective and asking why a number of times. I mean, whether it was when I was at SEIC or whether it was when I was leading a federal agency that was trying to implement something big and audacious as an independent authority, you needed to have people who could do parts of the work that you haven't done before. And everybody in government is lacking some experience or expertise. And, James knows I hired multiple different outside consultants, contractors, resources who could help build business models for a government agency, right? Because we needed to have a business model that we could prove to Congress was going to be self-sustaining. There's not a ton of people in government who have built multi-billion dollar, multi-tens of billions of dollar size business models that had to be self-sustaining in government. Right? That's a pretty difficult thing to do. And we hired some pretty darn good experts, not because we didn't know what we were doing, but because we needed a different perspective, and we needed to be able to bring different perspectives even to large telecommunication operators in the US to prove to them that our model was better. It was more effective. It was more cost effective for them to bid on. And it worked. But it was because we got outside expertise, and we got some very incredible business and telecom experts to sit at the table with our team, our team of leaders and experts, but to challenge us and to go back and forth and argue what might work, what might not work. And I think we don't do that enough in government, right? We don't get that outside expertise that has been, an expert network who has done these kinds of things both in the private sector and public sector and failed, hopefully, in the past, because they have lessons learned that can come to us and help us do it differently. And so I think that, that's a pretty incredible set of expertise if you can get your hands on it.
Great. And James,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, going back to the roadmap piece, I think this is really important because all these are tied. These things are tied together. If you have a roadmap and you have this sort of, even if it's a little bit of a soft timeline, you can pick parts of that project or those projects on that plan where you're going to need that outside influence, because timing is everything, right? You're not just going to snap your fingers and someone shows up. There's a process to making that happen, and you have to make a determination as a leader inside your organization. This is a permanent perspective, a persistent requirement that I'm going to have for the duration of this 3 to 5 year roadmap, whatever it is, or is this a 6 to 10 month, perspective I can bring in to help bolster the team through a certain period of time? You don't know that until you write that down and you hang it on the wall and you look at it every day because it should scare you a little bit that you have things that you're running towards and you've got to be prepared for them and having the right people and perspectives to come in to avoid essentially over internalizing or creating a cult of personality around those objectives is really important. So anything you can do to not disrupt, but maybe sometimes disrupt, but just bring that additional perspective, I think is really important. And maybe those folks like the work they're doing and they want to go do different things. And
Mhm.
you create a flywheel within your organization to build a mosaic of projects that are supporting a broader set of objectives over time. You can't do everything at once, though, without writing it down first and building a plan and identifying those resources along the way and being strategic about when to bring them on. You're kind of going to be lost, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things when you're starting to do that is the introduction of the leading technologies and the tools. I mean, AI is here. We're no longer waiting for it. There are things. How do organizations bring in that visibility of what is the potentially available to help transform their organization? And I know myself included, the reason I am still involved in the profession is because it is changing so quickly every quarter with new tools that can revolutionize how we do a solicitation process, how we do a contract, how we build a work statement. We can build a work statement using Copilot or Chat GPT or other tools today that we could have never done just a year or so ago. And the other side of this is the risk is people are afraid to use those tools.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be. We need to lean into this. I mean, I'm old enough to understand it. James, probably not you, but maybe TJ and I, when, we first ended up with computers on our desks as procurement professionals. They're like, well, you're never going to do your work on a computer. What? Now, 10 years, not even then, I was, my first day on my job at the county, I got every one of my procurement team a laptop. And they're like, what do I do with this? I said, well, there's going to be stuff that happens. And I need you to be 100% effective no matter where you were. Little did I know that the COVID was going to happen. But in between that, we had fires, floods, all those things. So, and now we live in a world where this is our norm.
No, Jack, I think it's so important for you to bring up AI and large language models in general. And we look at all the commercial tools out there. To me, it's, you could actually wake up in the morning and be trying to solve a problem. And one of the easiest ways to solve it today is to have 5 browsers open and to have Claude and Perplexity and ChatGPT and Gemini and other things all on and ask it the same question and get 5 different answers to help you understand where you want to go today. And if you're a government leader and you're not doing that, you're behind. And your point about not being afraid, I love hearing you say not being afraid because we're not the youngest generation out there today, right? And I'm not afraid, you're not afraid. I know James isn't afraid, but we also have to help train government to not be afraid, right? We have to train them to use these tools. And it doesn't mean that there's not governance or oversight and we don't have policies or procedures how to make sure we don't get hallucinations or crazy stuff that comes out in a government meeting. At the same point, we should be at a point in transparency and government procurement and government actions and city council meetings and other things that everything could be up and posted in a matter of minutes instead of days or weeks, right? Everything could be shared constantly, open data so that others could use large language models to be able to help us make better decisions because our data is public from a government perspective. I mean, these are things we should all be doing today. But also, I spoke to a police chief about a month ago and I would say not even a younger police chief, but he had this epiphany where he went out and spent his, 1999 on his Chat GPT, private service where he could actually store his data into a license and have the ability to use that professionally. And he took all of his administrative tasks, whether it was writing employee letters and promotions and corrective actions, to communications with the public, communications with the agency, all the things that he had to do that were very repetitive but needed to be done right. And he put them into his account to be able to re-leverage those same letters and to be able to rewrite them very quickly. And he realized he gained 10 to 15 hours a week as a police chief, 10 to 15 hours a week back that he no longer had to lose to administrivia. Because he was using, a AI tool that made him more effective and efficient. And just think if every leader in government could get 10 to 15 business hours back every week just by using the tools that are out there commercially today.
Yeah,
that creates that space to be strategic and to be visionary. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, no, I was going to say
more time with your people, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. You get to feed and nurture the organization in ways that you're probably being taken away from it from an administrative perspective, for sure. And Jack started the conversation talking about how we can't remain in this business as usual status quo, world. I think if you want to talk about not even just AI, but technology in general, the nature and speed of technology today, nature and speed of technology 10 years ago, our processes to procure that technology betrays the technology, right? By the time we get to the thing we want to buy, it's evolved 10, 12 steps ahead of us. And we don't have a way of being agile about it. Some are better than others, but by the time the federal government in particular catches up on the AI side, I remember when ChatGPT became, a household name. It was every CIO or CTO in government was suddenly their title was changed to Chief AI Officer or Chief Technology and AI Officer. Instead of going and hiring new people from that space, instead of hiring experts, even temporarily to come in and say, here's what you need to be thinking about for the next 12 to 18 months, they instead put the walls up and said, don't do anything right now because yeah, exactly. We're
too risky.
Risk averse.
Too risky.
Yeah, too risky.
Our
Can't
data
touch
may
it.
be exposed. Well, wait a minute. We're public servants.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I understand there's PII and I want to protect that, but no one's putting, in my whole career, I've never put social security numbers or personally PII in a contract document. But every contract I've ever written and signed is a public record.
Correct.
A great point.
Federal, state, and local. So why are we making these? I'll call it these rules on ourselves that are really preventing us from doing things that all of us should do. We need to buy like we would. We're first of all spending our own money, which we are because we're all taxpayers, and two, buying with the same urgency that we would in our private lives, because there are costs for not buying today, right? We're taking too long to make that decision, and that's where I don't know, James. I don't know if I have an answer. I'm kind of how do we get there, because we've always been hamstrung by our we have to have these very well documented procedures and policies and practices that take months or longer.
Right.
Can we do it in hours? Minimum weeks, right?
Yeah, and government just doesn't behave like that today. And in the future, you want them to. You do want the expediency, but also the accountability and all the regulatory requirements on top of that to coexist. In fact, not just coexist, but propel each other, so that government just gets better and better. But I would argue that even if you have the right system in place and you have tools available to you, and all the policies say you can go, at the center of it is a person who has to make that decision and not live between yes and no and thrive in the space of indecision. You need someone to actually go, we're going to do this now. and be prepared, right? If they make a mistake, to potentially have to pivot like everyone else does in the private sector or in their personal lives. You have to jump sometimes. So whether that's a full-time person that you were able to go uh, bring on board and incentivize into that position and create an awesome culture around and a great team, and kudos to you for doing that. The first step really is trying to identify that person. And we believe, right, just to go back to fractional source, we think that if you're being stuck in the churn, 80% of your day is being driven by administrative tasks. You don't have that roadmap. You don't have that perspective. There's nothing wrong with bringing someone in from the outside who's been in your shoes, has some scar tissue, maybe a few gray hairs, that can tell you, don't worry about those things. The real concern is X, Y, and Z. You still have to make that decision. You still have to make that procurement. If it's a procurement issue, you have to make that financial decision, whatever it is, to bring better technology and be more efficient and level up. Otherwise, you're just running a flat road. And that's going to really, that can stagnate pretty quickly.
Hey, James, you just said something that I think triggered something for me, which is cool. Which is, you kind of said like, what's the consequence and can we have to pivot, if this happens? And I think back to when I was having some really difficult questions in our FirstNet days, and I asked Jeff Johnson this question, and he says, always just think about like, what's the consequence, both good and bad, right? So if we do this thing and it's successful, we're going to have the consequences of A, B, C, D, E, F, G that are amazing. Now, what's the consequence if we fail at it? And in many cases, the consequence was like nothing. We just fail at it, right?
Mhm.
Not a huge consequence. And so when you look at that, you can take that to a procurement, what's the legal consequence? And in most cases, there isn't one, right? But we don't think about it. We're like, well, we've just never done that, or we don't know how to do that, or it's never been done that way before. And so to Jack's question of why, I'll also add the fun question of why not,
Mhm.
right? Why not try it that way? Why not
Ex-
try something new?
excellent comment. Because we give ourselves the tools in our procurements every day, whether it be to resolicit, whether it be to cancel without reason, um, at the organization's discretion. We also give ourselves, and this is truly unique in the public space versus all three of us have worked in the commercial space. When you sign a contract, you could have required, unless you have clauses that allow you to cancel that contract or escape that contract, you are in performance. The only way to get out is you either perform it or you breach, right?
Mhm.
In the public sector, we have those tools available to us, whether it be termination for convenience or many of our contracts, and people ask me all the time, why does the public entity have a base year of 1 year with 4 1-year options? And I go, because we want the best of both worlds. We want to look out in the horizon in 4 or 5 years horizon to take advantage of that, to have, I'll call it continuity of supply and service and all those good things. However, from a budgetary point of view, I don't know what I got this next year. I can't guarantee that. Okay. In today's day and age, I think I'm going to be a little bit maybe controversial and say, I don't know if we should have 5-year contracts because the world's changing so quickly. I think we may be causing ourselves more barriers by doing that and not getting the best providers in that world because they're not able to commit out 5 years
I
for our
eternity,
solicitation.
right, Jack, your point. Let's talk about an eternity in technology, right?
Well, yeah. And if you're in the private sector and you work for one of those companies that gets the 1 year base and the 4 year options, your recompete starts the day after you win that contract. For
Exactly.
the government's not, we're going to sit on this for a bit. I got 5 years. I'm not incentivized to chase and change at an option period. I have five, in my mind, classical CO. I think I have a 5 year contract
Right.
I've awarded. And I think that disincentivizes, to your point, I think, Jack, I think it disincentivizes two sides, the commercial performance and the accountability of the public sector to hold that commercial entity accountable. And so it's this weird stasis we'll do the letter of the law and the contract and nothing more. We won't go above and beyond. We won't try and beat folks on value, on performance, on price, because we don't have to, because we get comfortable. And the second we get comfortable, is the second we really fail at evolving. And I think that's a huge issue. So I don't think for me, it's not controversial. It's refreshing. I think we should be moving to more of a private sector model in the public space. But uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's and everything we do in that solicitation, James, is, I hear organizations say, "Oh, well, I need to have a multi-year contract because my solicitation process is so long." Well,
yeah,
why can't you make your solicitation process 3 weeks?
Yeah,
yeah,
you could
And
put
why
all the
can't
roads
you
over there in
award
2 weeks. There's no issue.
contracts for it's a 1-year contract? If you do well, I'm going to compete and it's going to take me, I'm going to cancel it and recompete and it's going to take me 3 weeks.
yeah. Also, I should be writing a contract terms, or I should write my terms reflective of the industry that I'm actually trying to
Amen.
bring work out of. So, TJ, you're talking about FirstNet. We wrote a 25-year IDIQ because this life cycle at the time of telecommunications life cycle and the incentive structures were long contract, multiple evolutions of technology. And when you're building a network, that's the space you need. If I'm buying a car, right, that's a little different. If I'm
Yeah,
buying consulting services, why would I go 5 years?
yeah.
So I'm probably
Or
shooting myself in the foot. I mean, we've all been
health
consultants, but
services. Many of our contracts, my prior contracts were health and human services. Um, and, to look out even a year on those types of services of what was needed by clients that are having problems, is going to be um, it's a different day just 6 months from now than there's no way I can forecast, what the challenges are going to be, a year from now.
right.
But fascinating discussion about, I call it the speed of contracting. That's what we need to revolutionize. I'm going to use the R word, the speed of contracting. And, we all have lived under the FAR. The FAR is our, 2,000 page Bible.
Yep.
And can we boil it down to 10 key principles? Competition, transparency, fairness, full access. There's a handful of things that are the key tenets of those 2,000 pages. Why do we need
Yeah.
2,000 pages?
That triggered something for me, right? Because I lived in the grants and contracts world for half my career. And every year there would be someone with a cart full of the regulations, like the books, the actual physical books,
Mhm.
like they're delivering books in a library or from the library in the prison. They'd pull a 44 CFR off, or they'd pull the FAR off, and they'd hand you the book and they'd say, "This is it." And I remember early in my career, I was like, "Well, can't I just get this online?" And at that point, you could go get a
Right.
PDF of it. But the majority of the information that you get out of those regulations typically come from people who have lived in that space and worked on either specific sections of those regulations, or in many cases helped write and develop the regulations along the way. They're either attorneys or contracting officers, chief procurement officer, whatever the title is. People were the way. That's how we got the information for the most part, because everyone had a way of implementing a piece of those regulations that, to both your points, first met the letter of the law, obviously, but second expedited the process. Like we were constantly trying to figure out how to move faster than the speed of contracting. And we knew we had to do it within a certain framework, but we're doing it with these tomes of 2,000 pages that, going back to the AI conversation, I can feed this stuff directly to an LLM, train it on that alone, and by the way, if I do that, I'm getting a very linear perspective from the AI, but I've solved a lot of my problems right there by just having something interactive. My preference is to go to a person though and help me
Yeah.
navigate this space until they change it, which there's no sign that they're going to change the FAR anytime soon. I mean, when I say change the FAR, they change it every year, but you know what I mean? Like they actually start
Right.
whittling down. Then I need people to help me navigate that
Well,
space and make
maybe
a
maybe
change.
what we started is the agency supplements that sit under the farm
Yeah,
because
right.
everyone has one.
Yep.
Um, um,
The other thing to think about, though, is this point of modifying the way we procure to deal with the modern software and AI world that we live in today. I mean, you just hit on a number of points where AI can help us find a solution, a legal appropriate solution within the acquisition regulation. But then in addition to that, I just had a renewal come up on a little SaaS product called DocuSign, something, yeah, I'm a fan of DocuSign. I use it all the time, something we use in procurement and other stuff. But I thought that what they were charging me was outrageous, and I was about ready to drop them. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to one of the other competitors. There's multiple competitors out there, what have you. So, ironically, it's very hard to get a live human being to have that negotiation with, and it would be for a small city or county as well. But so I went online and I went to go cancel rather than renew because I got my 30-day renewal notice. And I know that if you don't cancel like before 5 days out, you're going to automatically renew because that makes it easy to purchase. So I went in and I went through the cancellation process. And right after I went through, I'm going to cancel, amazingly, they offered me the exact same solution for 50%. 50%. Now I took it. Could I have gotten 75% off? I don't know. Maybe if I would have canceled again, but I did take it because then I felt like, okay, that's a rational price for the next year. But how many cities do you think are getting 50% off?
not many,
Yeah, no.
not many, because they're so tied up in the transactional day to day, and that's where this very small snippet of a personal experience brings such a tremendous value to the public sector, because TJ, I mean, I'm sitting here smiling because I had a similar thing with my XM radio.
Oh,
We
yeah.
just leased
Oh yeah.
a new car, and that the new car was on the smoking $5 a month deal, right? And it was about to expire in May, and they extended it for another year. And I asked the question, "Can I have it on my other two vehicles?" And the answer is, "Let me check." Oh yeah. So
Exactly.
it lowered the bills
Dramatically.
on my other two, because that is, just by asking.
Well, you have to understand how SaaS works, right? I mean, at the end of the day, maintaining your customers is way cheaper than getting a new one, and also expanding. So think about this. You need to renew that customer, but then to also expand that customer, they got two more licenses you may not have had, although it was less than what you would have paid individually. It's the whole customer success function that happens in a software as a service company. And I don't think in government we think about how that works and build our procurements around getting the most out of that. In that case, every year, rather than having the 5% automatic increase that's probably in your government contract for 5 years, what if you renegotiated every 11 months, right? And had a different way of going about that? I think they'd rather keep 500 people in a city or county on the solution than not. And not saying that you're always going to get that kind of a discount, but it's just understanding how procurement works for the technology you're buying as well as for the community.
James, you made an interesting point I'd like to bring you back in on, which is, bringing the terms and conditions and the business, the type of business you're dealing with is different depending on the industry. I mean, we just jumped from DocuSign to, satellite radio to, if you're buying a car or you're buying, HVAC, there's different expertise in those sectors. And I think organizations don't look out of themselves to get that expertise and consider that writing a contract is different in each of those sectors. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's where I was going. And actually, one of the things I lamented, both as a vendor to state and federal and local, but also being inside those entities as well, is that the person talking to those industries rarely changes. Like they don't put on a different hat and say, I'm HVAC guy today, or I'm an auto sales guy today, or buyer today. The buyer persona is largely static, which is frustrating as a seller because I want someone who speaks my language and is going to buy how I intend to sell. But if
Mhm.
I have to fit a square peg in a round hole every time I talk to government, my price is going to go up. My availability is going to go down. And frankly, you cost too much for me to talk to you. And so the incentives go sideways. But if I have someone inside of government who is an expert at buying a particular kind of service from a particular kind of industry, which I think we've kind of lost along the way as agencies become more monolithic in their hiring practices of contracting professionals, good, better, and different for whatever reason. Unless I have that expert, I'm having a really hard time getting to a negotiation. I'm going to spend more time on the mechanics of how you can purchase me as opposed to the value that I'm bringing to you and negotiating down to a specific price and a deployment model that makes sense for both of us. And it really does frustrate the outcome. And I think things are more expensive because of that. I think there's less opportunity for government to buy. I think that's the reason CIO whitelists are so short. They have vendors that they prefer because it was just easier for them. And who knows how you get on that list. It's also one of the reasons that we've developed cults of personality, not just in the procurement space, but in the government to business space, any sort of agreement. I'm not going to talk to you if I don't already know you, which makes all of this a lot harder in a world where we're spending a lot of time on Zoom and other platforms where we are going to have to play chat roulette a little bit with entities to figure out who the right person is who's going to actually buy my stuff. It makes it hard for the industry to create the roadmap we were talking about at the top of this call, to start chasing some of those deals. So I think we all lose when we don't have that expert or that bridge. And I think there's obviously creative ways to get there, but there's also some pretty obvious ways to get there too. And so when the three of us talk, I think we always kind of land back on this, which is how do we help both the commercial and the public sector work better together, and ultimately get the most out of what we're all paying in taxes today. I think fractional source is one of those avenues for sure.
I like your comment about, we need to find a way to meet each sector where they are, and really we need to buy what makes sense for that industry that we're buying from. Because me dropping a solicitation that's 1,000 pages on a commercial, a sector that is primarily in the non-public space, I won't get any proposals, quite frankly. To your point, it's too difficult. They have plenty of other business. So
Absolutely.
then the government is restricting their ability to get the very best solutions out there. And we're stuck with the same old, right?
Yep.
The more we restrict who can bid on something, the higher the price gets, right? I remember back in my Raytheon and SAIC days, people would ask me, why does it cost so much to get a government contractor to build something? And it's like, 50% of that was based on the ridiculous procurement process that lasted a year and took, $1 million to bid on. And then the second part of that was, all the risk shifting that went from government to the private sector so that there was no financial risk. Well, that those fixed price contracts and change orders, that changes your costs a lot. And most don't understand that. But in today's day and age where things can be so much more agile and they change so frequently, and there's software as a service and things are in the cloud and there's less hardware, there's less infrastructure, there's such an opportunity to be much more efficient and quick in how we do things and how we make government change, and to do it even at a lower cost.
I think we're at time, guys. I think that was a good closing comment there, TJ. I don't know, Jack, if you have any final thoughts before we sign off here.
Yeah, I think just in closing, I think like I said, it's a transformational time for all of us. I think I feel blessed to be in the role that I'm at now, and having some of those lessons learned, good ones and bad ones, and both sides of the fence. And hopefully I can share some of that insight with other organizations. And also, with the next generational leaders that are coming up, and really thinking about how we hire the workforce in the future. Hire, attract, first of all, explain, and I see this every day when I teach down at the university. I have, in our Knopf School of Business, a world-class business school, and many of the students there don't know what procurement is, let alone public service is. Supply chain to them. To them, supply chain is, transportation, big global shipping, Amazon, etc. But explaining to them that there are phenomenal career opportunities in public service and public procurement, and exposing that to them so they get excited about the career and come in. And who knows, 30, 40 years later, they're sitting where we're at. That technology will be. But just kind of, looking to continue to help in those areas.
That's great, Jack. Thanks. TJ, any final thoughts?
No, I just want to thank Jack for being on with us here today on the podcast to talk about fractional source and just talk about procurement and government operations in general. And always love learning from you, Jack, and you, James, as well. And hopefully this is helpful to everyone out there just to pick up some new ideas and where we're headed in 2025.
That's great. And if folks have made it this far, they should check us out at thefractionalsource.com. We also have a LinkedIn page under Fractional Source. You can find TJ, Jack, and myself out there on LinkedIn as well and other social media outlets. And we'll talk to you soon.